The steady rhythm of the heart monitor was the first sound Vincent Moretti heard. Beep, beep, beep. Each pulse echoed in the darkness of his consciousness like a distant drum calling him back to the world of the living. His eyelids felt impossibly heavy, as if weighted down by lead, but something primal inside him fought to open them. Survival instinct. The same instinct that had kept him alive in a world where trust was a luxury and betrayal was currency. When his eyes finally cracked open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room stabbed into his vision. Vincent winced, his head throbbing with a pain so intense it felt like his skull was splitting apart. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, mixing with the faint scent of industrial cleaning products. Everything was white and gray. The walls, the ceiling, the thin blanket covering his body. Only the gentle patter of rain against the window added any color to the scene, the droplets catching the amber glow of the New York City streetlights below. He tried to move his right arm and immediately felt the tug of an IV line. His left hand instinctively went to his head, fingers brushing against thick bandages wrapped around his skull. The memories came flooding back in fragmented pieces, like a shattered mirror reflecting moments of horror. The restaurant, the private room, the meeting with the Castellano family representatives. He'd been negotiating a territory agreement, something routine, something that should have been safe. Marco had checked the venue twice. The security had been thorough, and then, chaos. The door had burst open. Not the Castellanos. Different men. Masks. Weapons. The first shot had missed him by inches, embedding itself in the mahogany paneling behind his chair. Vincent had moved on pure instinct, diving behind the table as the room exploded in gunfire. He remembered Marco shouting, remembered the acrid smell of ammunition in the air, remembered the burning sensation across his temple as something, a bullet, debris, he couldn't tell, had struck him. Then nothing. Darkness. Until now. Mr. Moretti. A calm, professional voice pulled him from his thoughts. Can you hear me? Vincent's eyes focused on the figure standing beside his bed. A doctor, late 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes that had probably seen too many nights like this one. He wore a white coat with a name tag that read, Dr. Samuel Chen, and he held a small flashlight in his hand. I can hear you, Vincent managed to say, his voice rough and dry like sandpaper. His throat burned with the effort. Good. That's very good. Dr. Chen leaned forward, shining the light into Vincent's eyes one at a time. Follow the light with your eyes, please. Don't move your head. Vincent complied, tracking the beam as it moved left, then right, then up and down. The doctor nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. You're a very lucky man, Mr. Moretti. The bullet grazed your temple, causing a significant concussion and a fractured skull, but it didn't penetrate. Another inch to the right and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Lucky. Vincent almost laughed at the word, but the pain in his head made him think better of it. There was nothing lucky about being targeted in what should have been a secure location. Nothing lucky about having enemies bold enough to attempt such a brazen attack. No, luck had nothing to do with his survival, only skill, reflexes honed by years of living in the shadows, and perhaps a twist of fate that he wasn't ready to examine too closely. How long have I been out? Vincent asked. 36 hours, Dr. Chen replied, making notes on a tablet. We kept you sedated for the first 24 to allow the swelling in your brain to reduce. You're stable now, but I need to ask you some questions to assess your cognitive function. Is that all right? Before Vincent could respond, the door to his room opened and a familiar figure stepped inside. Marco Benedetti, his right-hand man, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who had been by his side for 8 years. Marco was in his early 40s, built like a heavyweight boxer, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that did little to soften his intimidating presence. Boss, Marco said, his voice thick with emotion that Vincent had rarely heard from the man. Thank God, we thought... He stopped himself, clearing his throat. The doctor said you might not wake up. Vincent studied Marco's face carefully. The relief appeared genuine. The slight tremor in his hands, the redness around his eyes suggesting sleepless nights, the way he gripped the doorframe as if needing support. But Vincent Moretti hadn't survived 3 decades in the underworld by taking appearances at face value. In his world, the most convincing performances often came from those with the most to hide. Give us a moment, Marco, Dr. Chen said firmly. I need to complete my evaluation. Marco nodded and stepped back into the hallway, but not before catching Vincent's eye. There was something in that look. Concern, Yes, but also something else. A question? Anxiety? Vincent filed it away in his mind for later analysis. Dr. Chen proceeded with his examination, asking Vincent a series of questions. What's your name? Vincent Moretti. What year is it? 2024. Who's the president? Vincent answered mechanically, his mind already working on a different problem entirely. Someone had tried to eliminate him. The attack had been coordinated, professional, and worst of all, it had happened at a location that only a handful of people knew about. The meeting with the Castellanos had been arranged less than 48 hours in advance. The venue had been chosen by Marco personally. Only his inner circle had been aware of the time and place, which meant the traitor was close, very close. Mr. Moretti? Dr. Chen's voice interrupted his thoughts. Did you hear my question? I'm sorry, could you repeat it? The doctor's brow furrowed slightly. I asked if you remember what happened before you lost consciousness, the events leading up to your injury. And in that moment, as Dr. Chen looked at him with clinical concern, as Marco waited anxiously in the hallway, as the rain continued to fall against the windows of his private hospital room, Vincent Moretti had an idea. It was risky, perhaps even dangerous, but it was also brilliant in its simplicity. What if he didn't remember? What if the concussion had done more damage than the doctors realized? What if Vincent Moretti, the feared boss of one of New York's most powerful criminal organizations, had woken up with no memory of who he was, what he did, or who had tried to eliminate him? The thought crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. Everyone would lower their guard. The traitor, thinking Vincent was vulnerable and ignorant, might make a mistake. The loyal ones would reveal themselves through their actions rather than their words. And most importantly, he would see who truly cared about him as a person, not just as a source of power and protection. Vincent let his expression shift, allowing confusion to cloud his features. I'm not sure, he said slowly, as if struggling to piece together fragments. There was a room, people talking, then loud noises. Everything went dark. He brought his hand to his head again, wincing. It's all fragmented, like trying to remember a dream. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. That's not uncommon with head trauma. Some memory loss is to be expected. Can you tell me what you do remember? About yourself? Your life? This was the crucial moment. Vincent had to make it believable. He let several seconds pass, his face showing the strain of someone trying to grasp at memories that weren't there. My name is Vincent Moretti. I live in New York. He paused, making it look like he was struggling. I run businesses. Import, export, real estate. All technically true. His legitimate fronts. But the details are hazy. And the people. I know Marco, he works with me, but I can't quite remember. He trailed off, selling the performance. Dr. Chen exchanged a look with the nurse who had quietly entered the room. Mr. Moretti, I'm going to recommend a neurological consult. Post-traumatic amnesia is serious but often temporary. With rest and proper care, your memories should return. However, I need to keep you here for observation for at least another 48 hours. Can I speak with Marco now? Vincent asked, maintaining the slightly disoriented tone. Of course, but keep it brief. You need rest. As Dr. Chen left the room, Marco re-entered, his massive frame seeming to fill the doorway. He approached the bed cautiously, as if Vincent were made of glass that might shatter at any moment. How are you feeling, boss? Confused, Vincent admitted, which was partially true, though not for the reasons Marco would think. The doctor says I have some memory problems. Things are unclear. Marco's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, concern, and then something that looked almost like relief. That last reaction was what Vincent had been watching for. Why would Marco be relieved that his boss had amnesia, unless he had something to hide? Don't worry about anything, Marco said, pulling a chair close to the bed. You just focus on getting better. The family is handling everything, business is secure, you're safe here. I've got 6 men posted in the hallway and 2 at every entrance to this floor. The family, Vincent repeated as if testing the words. Marco, I need you to be honest with me. What exactly do I do? What is our business, really? Marco hesitated, and Vincent could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. How much to tell a boss who might not remember the empire he'd built? How much to reveal to someone who was, in this moment, vulnerable and possibly permanently changed? You're a businessman, Vincent. You own legitimate enterprises, restaurants, real estate holdings, import companies. You're respected, influential. You have friends in high places, and you've built something your father would be proud of. All true. all carefully worded to omit the other half of the truth: the protection rackets, the underground gambling operations, the strategic territorial controls that made Vincent Moretti a name that carried weight in the shadows of New York City. And the attack? Vincent pressed. Who would want to hurt me if I'm just a businessman? You're successful, boss. Success breeds jealousy. Rivals. We're looking into it, but right now the important thing is you're alive. Marco stood, his chair scraping against the floor. There's someone else who's been desperate to see you. Your assistant, Elena. She's been here every day, waiting for you to wake up. She was pretty shaken up when she heard what happened. At the mention of Elena Rossi, Vincent felt something shift in his chest. Elena had been his executive assistant for 3 years. She managed his legitimate businesses, handled his schedules, organized his meetings. She was efficient, intelligent, and quiet, the type of person who blended into the background while keeping everything running smoothly. She knew about his real activities. She would have to, given her position, but she'd never been involved directly, never been part of the violence or the decisions that came with it. She was also someone Vincent had deliberately kept at arm's length, despite recognizing an attraction he refused to acknowledge. In his world, emotional attachments were liabilities. People you cared about could be used against you, could become targets, could betray you in ways that cut deeper than any business rival could manage. I'd like to see her, Vincent said. Maybe she can help me remember things. My schedule, my routine. I'll call her, Marco said, pulling out his phone. She'll be here within the hour. He paused at the door. Boss, one more thing. The cops came by asking questions. I told them you were unconscious and that we'd cooperate fully once you were recovered. But you should know, they're calling it an attempted robbery gone wrong. We kept the real details quiet. Thank you, Marco. Vincent watched his lieutenant leave, then closed his eyes, listening to the rain and the heart monitor's steady rhythm. The next hour passed slowly. Nurses came and went, checking his vitals, adjusting his IV, asking if he needed anything for the pain. Vincent accepted mild medication, nothing that would dull his senses too much. He needed to stay sharp, to observe every detail, every reaction. When the door finally opened again, Vincent opened his eyes to see her. Elena Rossi stood in the doorway looking like she'd aged years in the span of days. Her usually neat dark hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and she wore simple jeans and a sweater instead of her typical professional attire. Her olive-toned skin was pale, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She clutched a leather folder against her chest like a shield, and her hands trembled slightly as she met his gaze. Mr. Moretti, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena. Vincent studied her face, noting every detail. The redness around her eyes suggested she'd been crying. Her shoulders were tense, hunched inward as if she were trying to make herself smaller. There was genuine distress in her expression, a raw vulnerability that was difficult to fake. She took a tentative step into the room, then another, moving slowly as if afraid she might disturb him. I brought some things from the office, documents you were working on before the incident. I thought they might help you remember. Marco said you were having some trouble with your memory? Vincent nodded slowly. Everything is foggy. The doctor says it might be temporary, but right now, he let the sentence trail off, watching her reaction carefully. Elena's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. She set the folder down on the small table beside his bed and moved to the chair Marco had occupied earlier. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. That caught Vincent off guard, though he was careful not to show it. Your fault? Why would you say that? I was the one who confirmed your schedule that day. I sent the meeting details to Marco for security clearance. If I had been more careful, if I had double-checked the venue, maybe... Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to compose herself. Vincent's mind raced. Was this a confession? Or was it genuine guilt from someone who felt responsible simply by nature of her position? Elena had always been meticulous with his schedule, perhaps overly cautious. She triple-checked everything, which was one of the reasons he'd kept her in the role for 3 years. Elena, he said gently, using a tone he rarely employed. From what I understand, the attack wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. She looked up at him, and for the first time since entering the room made direct eye contact. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black in the dim hospital lighting, and they held a depth of emotion that made something in Vincent's chest tighten uncomfortably. When I heard the news, she said quietly, when Marco called and said you'd been shot, that they didn't know if you would make it, she took a shuddering breath. I've never been so scared in my life. I know it's not professional to say, but I don't care anymore. I was terrified. You've been here every day? Vincent asked, his manufactured confusion giving him permission to ask questions he normally wouldn't. Every single day. They wouldn't let me see you until now, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't go home and just wait for news. I had to be close just in case. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Vincent observed her body language, the way she leaned slightly forward as if drawn toward him despite herself, the way her fingers twisted together in her lap, the slight tremor in her voice that spoke of barely controlled emotion. Either Elena Rossi was the best actress he'd ever encountered, or her concern was absolutely genuine. Tell me about my schedule, Vincent said, shifting the conversation to safer ground while he processed what he was seeing. What was I working on before the incident? Elena visibly gathered herself, straightening her posture and adopting a more professional demeanor, though her eyes remained red-rimmed. You had several meetings scheduled that week. Monday was the real estate closing on the property in Brooklyn. That went well. Tuesday, you met with your accountants about the restaurant holdings. Wednesday was supposed to be the meeting with the Castellano representatives about the shared interests in the waterfront development project. All coded language. The shared interests in waterfront development was actually a negotiation about territorial boundaries and profit sharing from dock operations. But Elena delivered it as if discussing legitimate business, which was smart given that hospital rooms might have ears. And after Wednesday? Vincent prompted. You were supposed to have Thursday free. You'd mentioned wanting to personally inspect the new Italian restaurant you acquired in Queens. Friday was the charity gala, the one benefiting the Children's Hospital. You were one of the sponsors. She opened the folder and pulled out a sleek planner. I have everything documented here if you want to review it. Vincent took the planner, flipping through pages filled with Elena's neat handwriting. Appointments, notes, reminders. 3 years of his life organized and archived by this woman who sat beside his hospital bed, looking like her world had nearly ended. Elena, he said, setting the planner aside. Marco mentioned you were shaken up, but you seem like you're taking this very personally. Can I ask why? It was a bold question, one that crossed the professional boundaries he'd always maintained with her. But his supposed amnesia gave him license to ask things the old Vincent Moretti would never have voiced. Elena looked down at her hands, her fingers still twisted together. When she spoke, her voice was so soft he almost missed it. Because you matter to me, Mr. Moretti. More than you know. More than I should probably admit. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Vincent felt his carefully constructed walls trembling, felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. He'd spent years keeping everyone at a distance, trusting no one completely, allowing no one close enough to truly hurt him. And here was Elena Rossi, his quiet assistant, admitting to feelings that, if genuine, made her either the most vulnerable person in his life or the most dangerous. Before he could respond, his phone, which Marco had left on the bedside table, buzzed with an incoming message. Elena reached for it automatically, a habit born from 3 years of managing his communications. It's from Carlo Russo, she said, her brow furrowing as she read. He's asking about your condition and says he needs to speak with you urgently about the situation. She looked up at Vincent. Should I respond? Carlo Russo, one of his oldest associates, someone who'd been with the organization since Vincent's father ran things. Loyal, or so Vincent had always believed. But loyalty could be bought, and old friends sometimes made the most effective traders. Tell him I'm recovering but not taking calls yet. Doctor's orders. Elena typed the response quickly, her professional efficiency reasserting itself. But Vincent noticed the way her hands still trembled slightly, the way she kept glancing at him as if to reassure herself he was really there, really alive. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the persistent beep of the heart monitor and the rain that had intensified into a proper storm outside. Lightning flickered in the distance, briefly illuminating the room in stark white light before plunging it back into the amber glow of the bedside lamp. Elena, Vincent said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Given my memory situation, I need to know who I can trust. She looked at him with those dark, expressive eyes, waiting. Did you notice anything unusual before the attack? Anything out of place? Any strange requests or changes to my schedule? Elena's expression shifted, a flicker of something, fear, guilt, passing across her face before she could hide it. There was something. I wasn't sure if it was relevant, but in the days before the incident, Marco requested your schedule several times, more than usual. He said he was coordinating security details, which made sense, but she trailed off, biting her lower lip. But, Vincent prompted, his pulse quickening despite the calm he maintained in his expression. But he also asked me to update the meeting location for the Wednesday appointment at the last minute. Said the original venue had a security concern. I thought it was odd because he'd already approved the first location, but I didn't question it. He's your head of security, after all. Vincent's mind was racing now. Marco had changed the venue. Marco had known the new location. And Marco had been conspicuously absent from the actual attack. He'd claimed he was coordinating the perimeter security, but Vincent didn't actually remember seeing him in the moments before the shooting started. Did you tell anyone else about the location change? Vincent asked, keeping his tone casual despite the importance of the question. Only you, in the updated schedule I sent to your personal email that morning. No one else should have known except you, me, and Marco. Except Vincent didn't check his email that morning. He'd been dealing with an issue at one of his restaurants and had relied on Marco's briefing about the meeting location, which meant the information had come directly from Marco, who had also been the only one to know the change in venue. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture Vincent didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Marco, his right hand, his trusted lieutenant for 8 years, had set him up. The location change, the convenient absence, the slightly too relieved expression when he learned about the amnesia. It all pointed to one conclusion. But Vincent needed more than suspicion. He needed proof. He needed to see what moves Marco would make now that he believed his boss was vulnerable and compromised. Thank you for being honest with me, Vincent said to Elena. I know this must be difficult for you. Mr. Moretti, she said, and he heard the emotion creeping back into her voice. I know you might not remember, but I want you to know something. These past 3 years working for you have been the best of my life. When I first came to you, I was desperate. I had nothing. No real experience, no connections, just a degree I'd worked 3 jobs to pay for and a family that needed help. You took a chance on me. You paid me well, treated me with respect, and never asked me to do anything that compromised my values. Well, she added with a small, sad smile, you never made me do anything directly harmful, at least. She stood up, moving to the window where rain streaked down the glass like tears. I know what you do, Mr. Moretti. I'm not naive. I've seen enough, heard enough, to understand that your business isn't all legitimate. But I've also seen you donate anonymously to schools in your old neighborhood. I've watched you give jobs to people no one else would hire. I've seen you protect people who had no one else to turn to. She turned to face him, her silhouette backlit by the storm outside. You're not a good man by conventional standards, but you're not the monster people might think you are either. Vincent stared at her, genuinely moved despite himself. In all his years, no one had ever described him quite like that, with such clear-eyed honesty about his flaws paired with such adamant defense of his character. Not his father, not Marco, not any of the dozen people who claimed loyalty while they profited from his protection. Elena, he said, and his voice was rougher than he intended. Come here. She approached the bed slowly, stopping just beside him. Up close, he could see the worry lines etched around her eyes, the exhaustion that came from days of stress and fear. Without thinking, or perhaps thinking too much about the role he was playing, Vincent reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, her fingers small and delicate in his larger, calloused grip. She looked down at their joined hands with an expression of such vulnerability that Vincent felt something crack in the armor he'd spent decades building. Thank you, he said simply, for being here, for caring. Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. One spilled over, tracking down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away with her free hand. I'm sorry. I promised myself I wouldn't fall apart in front of you. You need people to be strong right now, not emotional. Maybe I need someone to be honest more than I need them to be strong, Vincent said, and he realized with surprise that he meant it. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the storm raging outside the window, the heart monitor providing its steady rhythm. Vincent found himself studying her face, really looking at her for perhaps the first time in 3 years. She was beautiful, he realized, though not in the obvious way that usually attracted attention. Her beauty was quieter, more subtle, in the intelligence in her eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw, the compassion that softened her features even in distress. The door opened suddenly, breaking the moment. Marco stepped in, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the scene. Vincent and Elena, hands still joined, sitting in the amber lamplight. Sorry to interrupt, Marco said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. But there's been a development. Angelo Moretti is downstairs. He's demanding to see you. Vincent felt Elena's hand tighten around his at the mention of his uncle's name. Angelo was his father's younger brother, a man who'd always believed he should have inherited control of the family business instead of Vincent. They maintained a civil relationship in public, but Vincent knew Angelo resented him, saw him as too young, too soft, too willing to modernize operations that Angelo believed should remain traditional. "Tell him I'm not taking visitors beyond immediate family and essential personnel," Vincent said, deliberately keeping his response measured. "Doctor's orders." Marco's eyes flickered with something. Irritation? Calculation? "He's not going to like that, boss. He's already making noise about how he should be informed of all business decisions until you're fully recovered." "I'm sure he is," Vincent replied dryly. "But my health is my priority right now, not Angelo's ego. Handle it, Marco." After Marco left, Elena released Vincent's hand and stood up. "I should go. You need rest, and I'm sure the doctors will want to limit your visitors." She picked up her folder, holding it against her chest once more. "Can I come back tomorrow? I could bring more files or just keep you company if you'd like." "I'd like that," Vincent said, and he wasn't acting anymore. Elena smiled, a small, tentative smile that transformed her features, and turned to leave, but she paused at the door looking back at him one more time. "Mr. Moretti, I'm really glad you're alive. Whatever happens, whatever you remember or don't remember, I just wanted you to know that." After she left, Vincent lay back against the pillows, his mind working through everything he'd learned. Marco's suspicious behavior, Elena's genuine concern, Angelo trying to assert control, the attack itself, which had been too coordinated to be random. He had 48 hours. The time Dr. Chen said he needed to remain hospitalized. 48 hours to maintain his amnesia act, to watch how people moved and spoke when they thought he was vulnerable. 48 hours to separate the loyal from the traitors, the genuine from the performers. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. "Heard you survived. That's unfortunate. Next time we won't miss." Vincent stared at the message, his jaw tightening. Someone was bold enough to threaten him directly, even knowing he was under guard in a hospital. That level of confidence suggested either stupidity or the backing of significant power. Neither option was good. He forwarded the message to Marco with a simple question. "Can you trace this?" The response came quickly. "On it. But boss, this is serious. We need to increase your security." Vincent almost laughed. Increase his security. As if the problem wasn't that his security had already been compromised from within. He looked toward the window where rain continued to fall. The city lights below blurred and distorted through the water-streaked glass. Out there, in the dark streets of New York, someone was planning their next move. Someone who thought Vincent Moretti was weak, confused, vulnerable. Let them think that. Let them all think that. Because while they underestimated him, while they positioned themselves for what they thought would be an easy takeover of his territory and operations, Vincent would be watching, learning, planning, and when he finally dropped the amnesia act, when he revealed that he remembered everything and had been testing them all along, they would understand why Vincent Moretti had survived in a world where the weak were devoured and the trusting were destroyed. The only question that remained, the one that kept circling in his mind as exhaustion finally began to pull him toward sleep, was about Elena. Her tears had seemed real. Her fear had appeared genuine. Her confession of caring for him had carried the weight of truth. But Vincent had been fooled before by people who seemed sincere. He'd learned that lesson in blood and betrayal. Could he trust her? Could he afford not to? Tomorrow, she would return, and he would watch her even more carefully, looking for the cracks in her performance, the moments where the mask might slip. Because if Elena Rossi was truly loyal, if her feelings were genuine, then she was the most valuable ally he had. But if she was part of the conspiracy, if her tears were calculated and her concern was fake, then she was the most dangerous enemy he faced. Either way, Vincent thought as his eyes finally closed and sleep claimed him, he would find out the truth, no matter what it cost him. The heart monitor continued its steady beep. The rain continued to fall, and in a hospital room high above the streets of Manhattan, a mafia boss who everyone believed had lost his memory began planning his next move in a game where the stakes were life, death, and the one thing he'd never expected to find, the possibility of someone who actually cared about him, not his power. Morning light filtered through the hospital room windows, pale and hesitant, as if uncertain whether it was welcome. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean sky and the sound of traffic from the streets below. A constant Manhattan symphony of honking horns, distant sirens, and the rumble of the subway beneath the pavement. Vincent had been awake for hours, lying still in the hospital bed, his mind working through possibilities and probabilities like a chess grandmaster planning 10 moves ahead. The night had brought little rest. Every time he'd closed his eyes, he'd seen fragments. Marco's too relieved expression, Elena's tears, the threatening text message, his Uncle Angelo's attempt to force his way in. And beneath it all, the central question that gnawed at him. Who could he trust in a world built on loyalty purchased with fear and profit? The door opened quietly, and a nurse entered, the same one from the previous evening, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and efficient movements. She checked his vitals without much conversation, noted something on her tablet, and adjusted his IV drip. "Dr. Chen will be by this morning to evaluate your progress," she said. "Your blood pressure is good, and the swelling has continued to decrease. You're healing well, Mr. Moretti." "Thank you," Vincent said, maintaining the slightly uncertain tone he'd adopted for his amnesia performance. "When can I expect to leave?" "That's up to Dr. Chen, but likely another day or two. Head injuries are tricky. We want to make sure there are no complications." She paused at the door. "You have a visitor waiting. A Ms. Rossi? She's been here since 6 this morning. Should I send her in?" Vincent felt something shift in his chest, an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation mixed with wariness. Elena had been here since 6? It was barely 8 now. She'd either barely slept or hadn't slept at all. "Yes, please send her in." The nurse nodded and disappeared. Vincent had maybe 60 seconds to prepare himself, to ensure his mask was firmly in place, to remember that no matter how genuine Elena seemed, he couldn't afford to truly trust anyone until he knew for certain who had orchestrated the attack on his life. When Elena entered, Vincent was struck again by how different she looked from the polished professional he'd worked with for 3 years. She wore black leggings and an oversized gray sweater that hung off one shoulder, her dark hair loose around her face instead of pulled back in its usual neat style. She carried 2 paper coffee cups and a white bakery bag, and her face, even without makeup and marked by obvious exhaustion, had a softness to it that made her seem younger, more vulnerable. "Good morning," she said quietly, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the room. "I hope it's okay that I came early. I brought coffee, your usual if you still like it the same way, and pastries from that Italian bakery on Mulberry Street. The one you—" She stopped herself, uncertainty crossing her features. "The one you used to like? I wasn't sure if you'd remember." Vincent watched as she set the items down on the rolling table beside his bed, her movements careful and precise. The coffee was from Cafe Reggio, his preferred spot in Greenwich Village, and she'd remembered exactly how he took it. Black, 1 sugar, extra hot. The bakery she mentioned was owned by the Marino family, old friends of his father, and their sfogliatelle were the best in the city. The fact that she'd gone to both places before 6 in the morning meant she'd been up for hours, planning this. "Thank you," Vincent said, accepting the coffee she offered. The warmth of the cup seeped into his hands, and the familiar bittersweet aroma was oddly comforting. "That was very thoughtful." Elena pulled the chair close to his bed and sat down, wrapping her hands around her own coffee cup as if needing its warmth. For a long moment she didn't speak, just looked at him with those dark, expressive eyes that seemed to carry the weight of everything she wasn't saying. "Mr. Moretti," she finally began, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something, and I need to say it now before I lose my courage, before I talk myself out of it like I have 100 times before." Vincent set his coffee down, giving her his full attention. This was it, the moment of truth. Whatever she said next would either confirm his suspicions or shatter them. His pulse quickened, though his expression remained calm, open, slightly confused. Exactly what someone with amnesia might look like when faced with a serious conversation. Elena took a shaky breath, and Vincent could see her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. "When Marco called me 2 nights ago," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "when he told me there had been an incident, that you'd been shot, that they weren't sure you would survive." She paused, closing her eyes as if the memory was physically painful. "I was at home, working on next week's schedule. I remember exactly what I was doing. I was color-coding your appointments, making sure everything was organized the way you prefer. And then my phone rang. A single tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Marco said there had been an attack. He said you were being rushed to surgery. He said the doctors weren't optimistic. And in that moment, Vincent, Mr. Moretti, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else in my life. She looked directly at him now, her eyes glistening with tears but her gaze steady, unflinching. I realized that I was in love with you, and that I might have lost you before I ever had the courage to tell you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and utterly unexpected. Vincent felt his carefully constructed walls trembling, felt something crack in the armor he'd spent decades building. This wasn't what he'd anticipated. He'd expected her to confess knowledge of the attack, or to reveal some hidden agenda, or to make a play for power now that he seemed vulnerable. He'd expected calculation, manipulation, betrayal. He hadn't expected this. Elena continued, the words spilling out as if having started she couldn't stop. I know it's completely inappropriate. I know you're my boss and I'm your employee, and there are 1,000 reasons why I should never have developed these feelings. But I can't help it and I can't pretend anymore. Her voice broke, but she pushed forward. For 3 years I've watched you. I've seen you be ruthless in business meetings and then turn around and personally deliver money to a widow whose husband worked for you. I've seen you make hard decisions that keep hundreds of people employed and protected. I've seen the way you carry the weight of everyone's expectations on your shoulders and never complain, never show weakness. She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands and leaned forward, her expression open and vulnerable in a way that made Vincent's chest tighten uncomfortably. And when I heard those shots, when I saw Marco's face and knew it was bad, all I could think was that I'd wasted 3 years being professional and appropriate and scared. 3 years of keeping my distance, of pretending I didn't feel what I felt, of convincing myself that it was just respect or admiration or gratitude for the opportunities you'd given me. Another tear fell, then another. Elena's voice dropped to barely a whisper. So here's what I need you to know, Vincent. Even if you don't remember me, even if you never remember, I don't care about your memory. I don't care if you come back as a completely different person. I don't care about the business or my job or any of it. Her voice broke completely and she pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to compose herself. I'm just so grateful you're alive. When I walked through those hospital doors yesterday and saw you awake, breathing, looking at me, she shook her head, unable to continue for a moment. It was like the whole world started working again, like I could finally breathe after holding my breath for 2 days straight. She stood up abruptly, moving to the window, her back to him as she tried to gather herself. Vincent watched her shoulders shake with silent sobs, watched her wrap her arms around herself as if trying to hold together pieces that threatened to fall apart. And in that moment, Vincent Moretti, who had built an empire on suspicion and strategic thinking, who trusted no one fully, who had learned through painful experience that emotional attachments were dangerous, felt something he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. He felt his heart break open. Because either Elena Rossi was the most gifted actress he'd ever encountered, or everything she'd just said was absolutely, devastatingly true, and the raw, unguarded emotion in her voice, the way her whole body trembled with the weight of her confession, the fact that she'd admitted to feelings that could cost her everything, it all felt real, in a way that cut through his careful defenses like a blade through silk. Elena, he said softly, come here. She turned from the window, her face wet with tears, and returned to his bedside. Without thinking, or perhaps thinking more clearly than he had in years, Vincent reached out and took her hand, pulling her gently down to sit on the edge of his bed. Thank you, he said, his voice rougher than intended, for your honesty, for your courage. I'm sorry, she said quickly, wiping at her tears with her free hand. This isn't fair to you. You're recovering. You don't remember things clearly. And here I am, dumping all of this emotional weight on you. I shouldn't have. No, Vincent interrupted, surprising himself. I'm glad you told me, because here's what I'm realizing. Whether I remember everything or not, whether my memories come back tomorrow or never, I need to know who the real people in my life are. Not the roles they play or the masks they wear, but who they actually are when everything else is stripped away. He studied her face, noting every detail, the genuine distress in her expression, the way she looked at him like he was something precious and fragile, the absence of any calculation or hidden agenda in her eyes. And what I'm seeing right now, he continued, choosing his words carefully, is someone who cares. Not about what I can do for her, not about position or power or protection, just cares. About me, the person. Fresh tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, but she was smiling now, a small, tremulous smile that transformed her features. You are worth caring about, Vincent. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. They sat in silence for a moment, hands still clasped, something fundamental shifting between them. Vincent knew he should pull back, should maintain professional distance, should remember that this woman, no matter how genuine she seemed, could still be part of the conspiracy against him. But he couldn't quite make himself let go of her hand. The moment was broken by a knock at the door. Marco entered without waiting for permission, his expression shuddering when he saw Elena sitting on the edge of Vincent's bed, their hands intertwined. Sorry to interrupt, Marco said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But we need to discuss security arrangements for when you're discharged, boss. And there are some business matters that require your attention, or at least your authorization for me to handle them. Vincent reluctantly released Elena's hand, watching as she quickly composed herself, wiping away the last traces of tears and moving back to the visitor's chair. The transformation was remarkable. Within seconds she'd shifted from vulnerable to professional, though Vincent could still see the emotion swimming beneath the surface. What matters? Vincent asked, maintaining his uncertain, slightly foggy tone. Marco pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a list. The shipment from overseas, the one scheduled for this Friday. The distributor wants confirmation that we're still proceeding given the circumstances. The property deal in Brooklyn needs your signature by end of business today, or we lose the deposit. And Angelo has been calling every hour demanding a meeting. He's claiming that family protocol requires him to step in as acting head until you're fully recovered. Vincent noted Elena's barely perceptible stiffening at the mention of his uncle. Interesting. She clearly didn't trust Angelo, which suggested good instincts on her part. Tell the overseas contact to proceed as planned, Vincent said, making it up as he went while sounding uncertain about his own decisions. Elena, do you know anything about the Brooklyn property? She nodded, pulling out her phone. I have the contract details and the lawyer's information. I can bring the documents here for your signature if you'd like. The closing is routine. It's the warehouse space you wanted for the import business expansion. More coded language. The warehouse was almost certainly for storage of items that couldn't be kept in more legitimate locations. But Elena delivered the information smoothly, naturally, as if discussing completely legal business operations. And Angelo? Marco pressed. Tell my uncle, Vincent said carefully, that I appreciate his concern, but I'm recovering well, and there's no need for interim leadership. You and Elena are handling day-to-day operations adequately. Marco's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. With respect, boss, some of the other families are asking questions. They want reassurance that leadership is stable. Angelo meeting with them might help. No. Vincent's voice was firm despite the confused persona he was maintaining. Angelo doesn't speak for me or make decisions for my organization. Is that clear? Crystal clear, Marco said, but Vincent caught the flash of irritation in his lieutenant's eyes before he masked it. I'll handle it. After Marco left, Elena let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. I don't trust him, she said quietly. Vincent's attention sharpened. Marco, why? Elena hesitated, clearly weighing whether to voice her concerns. It's just things he's done recently. Small things that individually mean nothing, but together they form a pattern that bothers me. Tell me, Vincent urged, genuinely curious now about what she'd observed. About 2 weeks ago I noticed Marco was asking more questions about your schedule, specifically about when you'd be alone or with minimal security. He said it was for coordination purposes, but it seemed excessive. Then there was the venue change for the meeting where you were attacked. He insisted on a last-minute switch, citing security concerns, but the original location had already been thoroughly vetted. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be detailed notes. I started keeping a record after the third or fourth time something felt off. Marco met twice with people I didn't recognize. Once at that diner in Queens you never go to, once in a parking garage in New Jersey. Both times he made sure to go alone, which isn't his usual protocol. Vincent felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. Elena had been paying attention, noticing things, keeping records. This wasn't the behavior of someone complicit in a betrayal. This was the behavior of someone who sensed danger and was trying to protect him, even if she didn't fully understand what she was seeing. Why didn't you tell me this before? Vincent asked. Elena's expression grew pained. I tried. 3 days before the attack, I put a note in your personal calendar, the one only you and I have access to. I flagged several of Marco's meetings and asked if you wanted me to look into them. But I don't know if you saw it before. She gestured vaguely at his bandaged head. Before everything happened, Vincent's mind was racing. A note in his personal calendar. He'd been so busy that week, so focused on the Castellano negotiation and the Brooklyn deal, that he might have missed it. Or perhaps he'd seen it and dismissed it, trusting Marco too completely to believe he could be the threat. Can you show me? Vincent asked. Elena pulled up the calendar on her phone, navigating to the entry from 3 days before the attack. There it was. A private note, flagged urgent. Concerns about recent security protocols. Marco's behavior patterns anomalous. Request private discussion at your earliest convenience. ER. She'd tried to warn him, and he'd either missed it or ignored it. And now he was lying in a hospital bed with a fractured skull, and Marco was positioning himself to take control of the organization. Thank you for telling me, Vincent said quietly, and thank you for paying such close attention. That kind of vigilance may have just saved my life, or at least will help me prevent the next attempt. Elena's eyes widened. You think there will be another attempt? Before Vincent could answer, his phone buzzed. Another message from an unknown number. Enjoy your recovery while it lasts. Accidents happen all the time in hospitals. Vincent felt ice slide through his veins. Someone was watching, monitoring his condition, and brazen enough to send direct threats. He forwarded the message to his personal security team, the men he trusted more than Marco, the ones who'd been with him since before his father's death. Elena read the message over his shoulder, and he felt her hand grip his arm. Vincent, you're not safe here. I have guards at every entrance, he said, though his mind was already working through the problem. Hospital security was porous. Too many staff, too many access points, too many ways for someone with money or connections to slip through. Guards that Marco selected, Elena pointed out. If he's the one behind this, or even just connected to whoever is, then those guards might not be as loyal as you think. She was right. Vincent hadn't personally vetted the security detail in the hospital. He'd been unconscious when they were assigned, and Marco had handled all the arrangements. What do you suggest? Vincent asked, curious to see how she'd think through the problem. Elena was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. We need people here who are absolutely, unquestionably loyal to you. Not to the organization, not to the money. To you personally. Who do you trust completely? Vincent considered the question. Who did he trust? The list was shorter than it should be for someone in his position. My personal driver, Tommy. He's been with me for 12 years, since before I took over from my father. And there's a woman, Sophia, who runs one of my restaurants. She's known me since I was a child. Used to work for my mother. Those two, I'd trust with my life. Then call them, Elena said decisively. Have them come here, have them stay in shifts. They can verify everyone who enters this room, and we should have Dr. Chen limit your visitors to a specific list. Only people you explicitly approve. Vincent found himself impressed by her strategic thinking. You've thought about this kind of thing before? Elena gave him a sad smile. When you work for someone in your position, you learn to think defensively. And after what happened, she trailed off, but the implication was clear. After the attack, she'd been thinking about nothing but how to keep him safe. Vincent made the calls. Tommy answered on the first ring, his gravelly voice filled with relief when he heard Vincent was conscious and talking. I'll be there in 20 minutes, boss, and nobody's getting past me. Sophia was equally quick to respond. Vincent, mio caro, thank God you're awake. I'm closing the restaurant right now. I'll be there within the hour. After the calls, Elena stood and gathered her things. I should go. Let you rest and give Tommy and Sophia room to set up proper security. But, she hesitated at the door. Can I come back this evening? I could bring dinner from Sophia's restaurant if you'd like. Something better than hospital food. I'd like that, Vincent said, and meant it. Elena smiled, that same soft, genuine smile that seemed to light her entire face, and left. Alone in the room, Vincent lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. The pieces were coming together. Marco was almost certainly the traitor, or at minimum involved in the conspiracy. Elena was genuinely loyal, genuinely caring, and possibly in love with him. His uncle Angelo was making moves to seize power, and someone was bold enough to send direct threats to his phone, while he was supposedly vulnerable and confused. The Amnesia Act was working better than he'd hoped. People were revealing themselves, showing their true colors when they thought he was too compromised to recognize betrayal or manipulation. But it was also more emotionally complicated than he'd anticipated, because Vincent hadn't expected Elena Rossi. He hadn't expected someone to care about him. Not his position, not his power, not what he could provide, but actually care about him as a person. He hadn't expected the way his chest tightened when she cried, or the way her hand felt in his, or the way her confession had cracked something open inside him that he'd thought was permanently sealed shut, and that was dangerous. Because in his world, emotional attachments were weaknesses that enemies exploited. People you cared about could be used against you, could be threatened or hurt or taken away to bring you to your knees. But as Vincent lay in that hospital bed, listening to the sounds of the city beyond his window and waiting for Tommy and Sophia to arrive, he found himself wondering something he'd never seriously considered before. What was the point of surviving, of building an empire, of accumulating power and wealth and influence if you had no one who genuinely cared whether you lived or died? Tommy arrived exactly 20 minutes later, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen his share of trouble and come out the other side. He embraced Vincent carefully, mindful of his injuries, and then immediately began assessing the room's security vulnerabilities. "The guards outside," Tommy said quietly. "Marco's people?" Vincent nodded. "Then we need our own people. I'll make some calls." Sophia arrived soon after, a short, stout woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and fierce dark eyes. She hugged Vincent like she was his own mother, scolding him in rapid Italian about being more careful and not scaring her like that. Then she pulled out Tupperware containers filled with homemade minestrone, fresh bread, and her famous tiramisu. "You eat," she commanded. "Hospital food is garbage. You need real food to heal properly." As Vincent ate, and the soup was infinitely better than anything the hospital had provided, he briefed Tommy and Sophia on the situation. He didn't mention the Amnesia Act. That secret needed to remain his alone for now. But he told them about his suspicions regarding Marco, about the threatening messages, about the vulnerability of his current position. "I need you both here in shifts," Vincent said. "No one enters this room unless they're on an approved list. Dr. Chen, nurses he personally verifies, Elena Rossi, and anyone I specifically call and authorize. No one else. Not Marco, not Angelo, no one." "What about me?" a new voice said from the doorway. Vincent looked up to see Detective Sarah Martinez, a homicide investigator he'd dealt with several times over the years. They had a complicated relationship. She knew what he was, and he knew she couldn't prove it. They maintained a professional courtesy that bordered on mutual respect, though neither would admit it publicly. "Detective Martinez," Vincent said carefully, "I wasn't expecting you." "Attempted assassination of a prominent businessman," she said, stepping into the room. Tommy moved to block her path, but Vincent waved him off. "I have questions." "I'm sure you do," Vincent replied, "but I'm afraid I can't be much help. The doctors say I have memory issues from the head injury." Detective Martinez studied him with sharp, intelligent eyes. She was in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of presence that suggested she didn't miss much. "Convenient," she said. "Traumatic," Vincent corrected. "Not convenient." She pulled out a notebook. "Tell me what you do remember." Vincent went through his carefully constructed story. Fragments, confusion, gaps in his recollection. Martinez took notes, her expression skeptical but professional. "Mr. Moretti," she said when he finished. "In my experience, people in your line of work don't usually cooperate with police investigations. The fact that you're talking to me at all is unusual, so I'll be direct. Who wants you dead?" Vincent almost smiled. "Detective, if I had complete memory, I could give you a list. But in my current condition, I honestly can't tell you. I don't even fully understand what my line of work entails." "Right," she said dryly. "The amnesia. How convenient. Sorry, traumatic, that you've forgotten all the details that might actually help catch the people who tried to eliminate you. If my memory returns," Vincent said carefully, "you'll be the first to know." Martinez clearly didn't believe him, but she couldn't prove he was lying. She handed him a business card. "Call me if you remember anything, or if someone tries again. Because trust me, Mr. Moretti, they will try again. People don't go to this much trouble and then give up after one failed attempt." After she left, Sophia shook her head. "That one is smart. She's suspicious." "She should be," Vincent agreed. "But suspicion isn't evidence." The afternoon passed quietly. Dr. Chen came by for his evaluation, pronouncing Vincent's recovery excellent but insisting on at least one more night of observation. Tommy stood guard at the door while Sophia kept Vincent company, telling him stories about his childhood and his mother, filling in a past that he supposedly couldn't remember, but that he knew by heart. As evening approached and visiting hours neared their end, Elena returned as promised. She brought dinner from Sophia's restaurant, chicken marsala, roasted vegetables, and fresh cannoli for dessert. She'd changed clothes, now wearing dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out the warmth in her complexion, and she'd pulled her hair back in a loose braid. "I'll leave you two alone," Sophia said with a knowing smile, gathering her things. "Tommy and I will be right outside if you need anything. Elena, make sure he eats all of it." After Sophia left, Elena set up the food on the rolling table, arranging everything with care. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The food as delicious as Vincent remembered, though he was careful to act like he was discovering it for the first time. "This is incredible," he said honestly. "Did I eat here often?" "At least twice a week," Elena replied. "Sophia's restaurant was your favorite. You said it reminded you of your mother's cooking." She paused, then added softly, "She passed away when you were 16. Cancer. You never really talk about it, but I know it affected you deeply." Vincent nodded, caught off guard by the genuine sympathy in Elena's voice. She wasn't using his mother's death as a manipulation. She was simply sharing information she thought might help him understand himself better. They talked as they ate, Elena filling in details about his life, his preferences, his habits. She told him about the legitimate businesses he'd built, the charities he supported anonymously, the way he insisted that every person who worked for him be paid fairly and treated with dignity. "You're not what people expect," Elena said quietly. "When they hear your name, they think of the stereotype, the ruthless criminal, the cold-blooded operator. And yes, you can be hard when you need to be. You make difficult decisions. But you're also the man who personally paid for 3 employees' college tuitions, the man who shows up at the hospital when someone who works for you is sick, the man who remembers everyone's birthday and makes sure their families are taken care of." "You make me sound almost admirable," Vincent said. "You are," Elena replied simply, in a complicated way. "You're not a good man by conventional standards, but you're a man who follows a code, who keeps his word, who protects the people in his circle. That's more than most people can say." Before Vincent could respond, there was a commotion outside his door. Raised voices, Tommy's deep bass warning someone to back off, and then the door burst open. Angelo Moretti stood there, his face red with anger, 2 of his own men flanking him. Tommy was right behind them, hand on his weapon, clearly ready to intervene. "What the hell is this?" Angelo demanded, gesturing at Tommy. "I'm family, and this gorilla won't let me see my own nephew." Vincent held up a hand to Tommy, signaling him to stand down but stay alert. "Uncle Angelo, I wasn't expecting you. I've been trying to see you for 2 days. Angelo's voice was loud, aggressive. He was in his early 50s, shorter and stockier than Vincent, with the kind of face that naturally settled into a scowl. "Your boy Marco keeps putting me off, and now you've got private security keeping family out? What kind of disrespect is this?" Elena stood, moving subtly closer to Vincent's bed in a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Angelo. "Who's this?" Angelo asked, his tone dismissive. "Your secretary? This is family business, sweetheart. You should leave." "She stays," Vincent said firmly. "Elena is trusted and she's helping me manage affairs while I recover." Angelo's scowl deepened. "That's what I want to talk about. Managing affairs. Vincent, you've had a serious injury. You're confused, disoriented. The family needs strong leadership right now, and everyone knows tradition says the boss names his successor," Vincent interrupted, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "I'm still alive, still in control, and I don't recall naming you as anything other than a respected elder of the family." "You can barely remember your own name," Angelo exploded. "Marco told me about the amnesia. How can you run things when you don't even know what things are?" So Marco had been talking to Angelo. "Interesting. Very interesting. My memory is returning," Vincent lied smoothly. "And what I do remember is that this organization runs because of systems and trusted people, not because of any one individual. Elena and my team are managing day-to-day operations perfectly well." "This is ridiculous," Angelo muttered. "The other families are talking, Vincent. They're saying you're weak, that you're vulnerable. They're saying maybe it's time for new leadership in the Moretti organization." "Let them talk," Vincent said. "Words are just words. When I'm fully recovered, I'll remind everyone why I hold this position." Angelo stared at him for a long moment, calculation in his eyes. Finally, he shook his head. "You're making a mistake, nephew. Pride comes before a fall. Remember that." He turned and left, his men following. Tommy closed the door firmly behind them. Elena was trembling, Vincent noticed. She'd stood her ground when Angelo tried to dismiss her, but the confrontation had clearly rattled her. He reached out and took her hand, feeling her fingers cold against his palm. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, but her voice shook when she spoke. "He's dangerous, Vincent. Angelo. I've seen the way he looks at you, like he's measuring a coffin." "I know," Vincent said quietly. And he did. Angelo had always resented him, had always believed that age and experience should trump succession planning. His father had chosen Vincent to inherit leadership, and Angelo had never forgiven either of them for it. "Vincent," Elena said, her voice urgent now, "you need to be careful. With Marco acting strange, Angelo making power plays, the attacks, the threats, something is building. I can feel it, and I'm scared that next time they won't miss." She was right to be scared. Vincent could feel it too. The pressure building, pieces moving into position, enemies circling. The Amnesia Act was revealing his enemies, but it was also making him appear vulnerable, which was emboldening them to make moves they might otherwise have reconsidered. "I need you to do something for me," Vincent said, making a decision. "I need you to keep detailed records of everything. Every meeting Marco has, every time Angelo shows up, every strange occurrence. Can you do that?" "I already am," Elena said. "I started the day after the attack. I have notes on my phone backed up to a secure cloud account that only I can access." Vincent found himself smiling despite the situation. "You're remarkable. You know that?" Elena blushed, the color rising in her cheeks. "I'm just trying to keep you safe." "Why?" Vincent asked, genuinely curious now. "I've been your employer for 3 years, but I've never been particularly warm or accessible. I've kept you at a distance, treated you professionally but not personally. So why do you care so much? Why risk yourself for me?" Elena looked down at their joined hands, her expression complex, part vulnerability, part determination. "Because sometimes you can't help who you care about. Sometimes your heart makes decisions your head knows are impractical or dangerous or foolish. And sometimes," she looked up at him, her eyes shining with emotion, "sometimes you meet someone who makes you want to be brave, even when you're terrified." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Vincent felt that crack in his armor widening, felt the walls he'd built so carefully beginning to crumble, and the most terrifying part was that he wasn't sure he wanted to stop it. Outside the window, the sun had set and Manhattan had transformed into a glittering landscape of lights. The city that never slept, where fortunes were made and lost, where power shifted like tides, where trust was the rarest and most valuable currency of all. And in a hospital room high above the streets, a mafia boss who everyone believed had lost his memory held the hand of the one person who seemed to genuinely care about him, and wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life, or perhaps the first truly honest decision he'd ever made. "Stay," Vincent said quietly. "Just a little longer." Elena smiled. "As long as you need me to." But even as she said it, Vincent's phone buzzed with a new message, this time from Marco. "Angelo is furious. He's talking about calling a family meeting. If the other families vote, they might override your authority. We need to talk strategy." Vincent stared at the message, his jaw tightening. Strategy. From the man who had likely orchestrated his attempted elimination. The man who was positioning himself to take control under the guise of helping. And beneath Marco's message, another text from the unknown number. "Tick-tock, Moretti. Time is running out." Vincent was discharged the following morning. Dr. Chen cleared him with strict instructions for rest and follow-up appointments. Elena had arranged for his penthouse to be prepared, insisting on staying to help him adjust to home life. The Manhattan penthouse was exactly as Vincent remembered. Sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Gray clouds gathered outside, matching his turbulent thoughts. Elena moved through the space with familiar efficiency, organizing medications and preparing the guest room for herself. "You should rest," she said, guiding him to the leather sofa. "I'll make something light for lunch." But Vincent couldn't rest. His mind churned with the investigation he'd been conducting secretly. Tommy had provided crucial information. Marco had been seen meeting with rival family members. Financial records showed unexplained transfers from Marco's accounts. Over the next 2 days, Elena stayed close, caring for him with genuine tenderness. They shared meals, conversations, quiet moments that felt dangerously domestic. Vincent found himself watching her, the way she hummed while cooking, how she checked on him constantly, the softness in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. but the evidence against her kept nagging at him. Tommy discovered Elena had been transferring significant amounts of money to an offshore account. The transaction started 3 months before the attack. Marco had provided phone records showing Elena had called an unknown number the day before the assassination attempt. Vincent's heart warred with his mind. Everything about Elena felt genuine. Her tears, her confession, her constant care. But the evidence was damning. On the 3rd evening home, Vincent made his decision. He found Elena in the kitchen preparing dinner, her back to him. "Elena, we need to talk." She turned, immediately sensing the shift in his tone. "What's wrong?" "I know about the money transfers," Vincent said, watching her face carefully. "The offshore accounts. The phone calls before the attack." Elena's face drained of color. "Vincent, I can explain." "Then explain." His voice was hard now, the confused amnesia act dropping slightly. "Explain why you've been moving money. Explain why you called an unknown number the day before someone tried to end my life." Tears filled her eyes. "It's not what you think. Please let me show you something." With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone, navigating to her photo gallery. She showed him pictures of a young woman, maybe 20 years old, who shared Elena's dark eyes and delicate features. "My sister Sophia. She's in college, Columbia University. 3 months ago, Marco approached me. He said Sophia had gotten involved with the wrong people, owed money to dangerous individuals. He said if I didn't help him, if I didn't provide him with information about your schedule, they would hurt her." Vincent's chest tightened. "The money transfers? Protection payments. He told me where to send them, said it would keep her safe. And the phone call the day before." Her voice broke. "He called me, asked for confirmation of the meeting location. I tried to give you a wrong address, tried to warn you with that calendar note, but he knew. He always knew." She collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let them hurt Sophia, but I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to you. So I tried to find a middle ground, tried to protect you both, and instead I nearly got you taken from this world." Vincent studied her, the genuine anguish, the way her whole body shook with guilt and fear. This was the missing piece. Not betrayal, but coercion. Not conspiracy, but a desperate woman trying to protect her family. "Where is Sophia now?" he asked quietly. "At school. She doesn't know any of this. I kept it from her." Elena looked up at him with devastated eyes. "I understand if you hate me. I understand if you want me gone. I should have told you, should have trusted you to protect us both. Instead, I let Marco manipulate me, and you almost died because of my weakness." Vincent moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. "You're not weak, Elena. You were protecting your sister. That's not weakness. That's love. But I put you in danger. Marco put me in danger." Vincent corrected firmly. "He used your love for your sister as a weapon against us both. That's on him, not you." Relief and disbelief warred in Elena's expression. You believe me?" "I do." And he did. Because this explained everything. Her genuine care for him paired with her suspicious actions. She'd been caught between impossible choices, trying desperately to save everyone. Before he could say more, the penthouse door burst open. Marco stood there with 4 armed men, his face twisted with cold determination. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, boss," Marco said, raising his weapon. "But you were getting too close to the truth. Time to finish what I started." Elena threw herself between Vincent and the weapon. "No!" Marco's eyes widened in surprise, then hardened. "Move, Elena, or you die with him." "Then I die with him," she said firmly, her voice steady despite her fear. Vincent felt something shift in his chest, a wall crumbling completely. This woman, this incredible woman, was willing to sacrifice herself for him, and in that moment, he made his own choice. "Actually, Marco," Vincent said, his voice dropping the confused, uncertain tone he'd maintained for days, "I think you're the one who miscalculated." He pressed a button on his phone. Instantly, his personal security team, the men he'd been positioning for days, flooded into the penthouse from the back entrance. They'd been waiting, watching, ready for exactly this moment. Marco's face went white as he realized the trap. You remembered? This whole time?" "Every single moment," Vincent confirmed, standing tall now, all pretense of weakness gone. "I faked the amnesia to see who would reveal themselves. And you, Marco, exceeded all my expectations for betrayal. You manipulated him," Elena breathed, understanding dawning. The amnesia was a test. Vincent looked at her, seeing the hurt flash across her features. "Yes, I needed to know who I could trust. And did you? Elena asked quietly. Did you learn what you needed? Vincent held her gaze. I learned that the person I should have trusted all along was standing right beside me, willing to die to protect me. Marco lunged for his weapon, but Vincent's men were faster. Within seconds, Marco was disarmed and restrained. His men surrendered. Tommy, Vincent said calmly, take him to the warehouse. I'll deal with him later. And make sure Sofia Rossi gets a new security detail. The best we have. No one touches her. As his men dragged Marco away, Vincent turned back to Elena. She stood frozen, emotions warring across her face. Relief, hurt, confusion, hope. You tested me, she said softly. You made me confess everything while you were pretending, evaluating, judging. I did, Vincent admitted. And I'm sorry. But Elena, but it worked. She interrupted, a small, sad smile touching her lips. You found your traitor. You protected yourself. That's what matters. No, Vincent said firmly, closing the distance between them. What matters is that when Marco pointed a weapon at me, you didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate the risk or weigh the options. You just stepped in front of a threat without a second thought. He took her hands in his, feeling them tremble. That's when I knew. Not because of any test or manipulation, but because in that moment, I saw the truth that no amount of acting could fake. You care about me? Genuinely, completely, irrationally care about me, and I... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Admitting feelings, showing vulnerability. It went against every survival instinct he'd honed over decades. And you? Elena prompted, her dark eyes searching his face. And I care about you too, Vincent said quietly. More than I thought I was capable of caring about anyone. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling now. A real, brilliant smile that transformed her entire face. You're terrible at timing, you know that? We're surrounded by your security team. Marco just tried to end your life, and this is when you decide to tell me how you feel. Despite everything, Vincent found himself laughing. I've been accused of worse timing. She reached up, touching his face gently, her fingers tracing the edge of his bandages. What happens now? Now, Vincent said, we deal with the threats. Marco will face consequences. Angelo will be put in his place. The organization will be secured, and your sister will be protected. Truly protected, not manipulated. And us? Elena asked softly. Vincent pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She fit perfectly against him, her head tucking under his chin, her hands clutching his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. Us, he said into her hair. We figure out together. No more tests, no more pretending, just truth. Elena pulled back slightly to look up at him. Even if the truth is complicated, even if it's messy and difficult and completely impractical for a man in your position to be with his secretary? Especially then, Vincent said, because I've spent my entire life doing what's practical, what's strategic, what makes sense for business and power, and it got me a fractured skull and an organization full of people I can't trust. Maybe it's time I try something different. Something different like what? Like trusting someone completely, like letting someone in, like admitting that power and control don't mean much if you have no one who genuinely cares whether you live or die. I care, Elena said fiercely. I care so much it terrifies me. Good, Vincent replied, because you terrify me too, in the best possible way. They stood there in the middle of his penthouse, wrapped in each other's arms while outside the windows, storm clouds finally broke and rain began to fall. Somewhere in the city, Marco was being dealt with. Angelo was receiving a message about knowing his place. The organization was being secured, but in that moment Vincent wasn't thinking about any of it. He was thinking about the woman in his arms, about the words she'd spoken in that hospital room that had cracked his armor, about the way she'd thrown herself between him and danger without hesitation. Vincent? Elena said quietly. Yes, I forgive you. For the test, for the manipulation. I understand why you had to do it. He pulled back to look at her. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, she agreed. But you have it anyway. Because I understand what it's like to live in a world where trust is dangerous, where emotional attachments can be used against you. You did what you needed to do to survive. I can't fault you for that. You're too generous, Vincent said. Elena smiled. Or maybe I just know that the man who faked amnesia to catch traitors is the same man who made sure my sister would be protected, even when he thought I might be his enemy. Actions speak louder than words, Vincent. And your actions tell me everything I need to know. Vincent kissed her forehead gently. I promise you, no more tests, no more games, just honesty, even when it's difficult. I'll hold you to that, Elena said. Then, more quietly, what will you do about Marco? Vincent's expression hardened. Marco broke the most fundamental rule. He betrayed family. There are consequences for that, but I won't burden you with the details. I don't want to know, Elena admitted. I know you have to do what you have to do. I've accepted that about you. I don't want to watch you become someone different because of it. I won't, Vincent promised. You keep me grounded, Elena. You remind me there's more to life than power and strategy. The evening wore on. Tommy returned with an update. Marco was secured and talking, providing information about his co-conspirators. Angelo had been summoned for a family meeting the following day, where Vincent would make clear that any challenge to his leadership would be met with decisive action. Sophia had been assigned the best security detail without being told why, believing it was simply a precaution given her sister's employment. Through it all, Elena stayed by Vincent's side, not as his secretary, not as his assistant, but as his partner, equal, trusted, valued. As night deepened and exhaustion finally caught up with them both, Vincent walked Elena to the guest room she'd prepared for herself. Stay with me, he said at the doorway. Just stay. I don't want to sleep alone tonight. Elena understood what he wasn't saying, that after days of testing everyone, of trusting no one, of maintaining a careful facade, he needed the comfort of someone he knew was genuine. I'll stay, she said simply. They lay together in Vincent's bed, Elena curled against his side, his arm around her shoulders. No pretense, no performance, just two people who'd found something real in a world built on deception. Elena, Vincent said into the darkness. Thank you. For everything. For caring when you had no reason to. For staying when anyone rational would have run. For seeing past what I am to who I am. Elena pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. Thank you for letting me in. For trusting me. For being brave enough to care back. I don't feel brave, Vincent admitted. I feel terrified. That's how you know it's real, Elena said softly. The things worth having are always terrifying. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows. But inside Vincent's penthouse, wrapped in each other's arms, they'd found something neither had expected. A connection forged not in manipulation or strategy, but in genuine care and hard-won trust. The test was over. The truth had been revealed. And now they would face whatever came next. Together. 3 months later, Vincent stood by his penthouse windows, watching the sunrise over Manhattan. Elena joined him, coffee in hand, her engagement ring catching the light. Any regrets about the amnesia game? She asked softly. Vincent pulled her close. Just one, that I didn't trust you from the beginning. You trust me now? With everything I am, he replied, kissing her forehead. His organization was stronger, restructured with loyalty over fear. Marco faced justice. Angelo had stepped back,